pleased to be collaborating on this side event on the 16th of March today, which is focused on generation equality. Just to say quickly, Shakira, just to tell the participants and those listening in, that the vision of the Feminist Movement and Leadership Action Coalition is that feminist movements and leaders in all of our diversity are fully resourced and supported to become sustainable, and that we can carry out our work without fear of reprisal and advance gender equality, justice, peace, and human rights for all from an intersectional approach. So that's who we are. In this section of the popcorn event, I like the title, we will be exploring some more the approaches and actions which are required, in fact, which are imperative to advance climate justice and to respond to climate emergencies in such a way that the needs of women in all of our diversities, using an intersectional analysis, are centered, including through our participation in decision-making around the allocation of resources. We've heard quite a lot about that from the videos. So with me, we have this morning 4 panelists. 3 are with us and 1 we will hear from via video. And so I want to start off with Yamide Dagnet, who is the Director for Climate Justice of the Open Society Foundation. And Open Society Foundation is one of the leaders in the Action Coalition of Feminist Movements and Leadership. Yamide, can you tell us, what does science tell us about the role of women in tackling climate impacts? What do we learn from efforts in applying a gender lens to climate plans?
Thank you very much, and I hope you hear me well.
Very well.
First of all, let me thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak, and I will try to be as brief as possible. And really, what I would say about science, 2 weeks ago, the IPCC report, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, has released a report, the most authoritative scientific report on the impacts of climate change, which were overshadowed by the war in Ukraine, despite its importance. And what it did confirmed everything that has been heard in those videos, that the lasting and severe impacts of the climate crisis are not felt equally. The report, more than before, highlights the impacts on marginalized people, especially women, children, displaced, put also an emphasis on displacement, look at the impact on health and the well-being, the role of cities at local level, what can be done. It also highlights, the role and contribution of indigenous knowledge as it never been done before again. So I will not come back on some of those statistics that have been highlighted, in the videos, but it definitely, call for more adequate access, for women to financial resources, to cover, weather-related losses on adaptation technology, more resources to access land. There's still discrimination in accessing land, and also fight land grabbing. And they still lag behind, women still lag behind when it comes to participation in decision-making process. But I have hope, because if this report also calling for an unsiloed approach, more holistic, way to tackle those issues and force, us to really tackle multiple crises. It's because for the first time, 40%, of the authors were women. I really, for me, that's a sign of hope, because the first IPCC report in the 90s had only 8% of authors being women. 30% now in the overall, settlements of the report of the IPCC, 40% on this particular one. This is a record, and that gives me hope. And this is probably why it is, so broad and so rich. And we need more, more women. There's still only 30% of women participating as climate negotiators. And we need more again. And why? This, we heard in Glasgow that we need to generate trillions, that in 2009, developed countries committed to come to support developing countries in their transitions to low carbon economies and more resilient societies, with 100 billion per year from 2020, and they failed to do that. And yet, negotiations are starting to really get the trillions needed to really, by 2025, to do that. I'm mentioning this because there's a UNDP report that was highlighting that the role, if we take into account if we improve gender inequality, we could generate as much as $12 trillion toward the annual global GDP growth in 2025. So it struck me because I feel like a lot of time of those negotiators needs to be on how to really empower women, to play, their role and generate the trillions that are actually needed.
Thank you very much, Yamide.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to have to interrupt you there because we are chasing the time, but I think we definitely got the message. We need more resources, and women's voices should be centered to articulate that demand and expectation. I would like to move on to Paula Barreto, who is from the Transnational Birth Equity Director for the National Birth Equity Collaborative. Paula, can you give us your response to what are the historical and intersectional issues or dimensions that we need to address for deepening gender equality or gender justice to address the climate crisis? You have about 4 minutes.
Thank you so much for your question. It's an honor to be on this panel today. I would like to talk a little bit about climate justice as racial justice and how terms such as environmental racism are key to the concrete intersectional discussions and solutions for the climate crisis. Climate change disproportionately impacts Black people, especially women and girls, due to racism, anti-Blackness, colonialism and its legacies, and of course, environmental racism. Environmental racism, a concept created by Benjamin Chavez, is a form of systematic racism whereby racialized communities are disproportionately impacted by policies and practices that force them to live close to sources of toxic waste, such as mines, landfills, power stations, and major roads. As a result, communities suffer greater rates of health problems. For example, in New York, a neighborhood called Mott Haven in the Bronx is also known as the Asthma Alley due to its terrible air pollution levels. This neighborhood is 97% Black and Latino. People living in Mott Haven need asthma hospitalizations at the 5 times in the US national average and at the rates 21 times higher than any other New York City neighborhood. In 2010 in Brazil, a rain of metallic dust fell from the sky in the Rio de Janeiro neighborhood of Santa Cruz, the farthest from the city center. Since then, the phenomenon has occurred several times, causing allergies, infections, and inflammations in the majority Black population. The rain is caused by the production of the country's largest steel exporter, Canyon, Brazil. In the first 3 months of 2020, when storms flooded huge urban areas in São Paulo, Rio, and Minas Gerais, the Black families living in the favelas of those cities paid the higher price and lost lives in episodes of landslides and drowning. In the first quarter of this year alone, thunderstorms caused at least 10 deaths and destroyed the homes of over 11,000 people. Ongoing invasions of indigenous lands and fires in their surroundings areas deeply affect the lives in the indigenous villages. So of course, do the murders of indigenous community leaders. Another important concept that I think it's interesting to use when we are thinking about race and climate change and intersectionality is the concept of necropolitics, developed by Achille Imambe. Necropolitics translates to the politics of death, and it is the capacity to define who matters and who does not, who is disposable and who is not. In this case, which people can be most affected, silenced, and neglected when we are talking about climate change with a higher tolerance of societies. In conclusion, a decolonial anti-racist approach to climate change is essential to the development of practices that center Black and Indigenous women and girls who are fighting climate change for years now and who are the first to be impacted by it. An intersectional approach includes the understanding that climate justice is also about land, food, human rights, traditional practices, and knowledges. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anna Barreto. I think I learned a new concept here in necropolitics. I went to look at it, and it really is apropos to this discussion. Thank you very much. And I want to move on to Tanya Trevors, who is the Deputy Director of Global Affairs Canada. Tanya, Canada is one of the member states on the Action Coalition for Feminist Movements and Leadership. Tanya, can you suggest some key messages to ensure that climate justice movements integrate and advocate for sexual and reproductive health and rights?
Yes, thanks, Roberta. First of all, I also want to start by just thanking Shakira, Vashti, and other members of the Youth Coalition, UN Women, and all those who have joined us today, and specifically sharing those powerful stories, alarming stories by activists and leaders, as well as their visions and messages in the video. On your question, Roberta, well, first, I think we need to be doing exactly what we're doing here today. We need to be speaking up, we need to be loud, we need to give space for advocating for gender responsive climate action that really addresses the linkages between climate change and SRHR. Because we're only going to address climate change, biodiversity loss, and environmental degradation when the sexual and reproductive health and rights of women, adolescents, and children in all their diversity are heard and respected. Second is that I really think we need to be making sure that all people understand the links between these two issues, because although we speak about there being a connection, the connection is not always well understood. We need to enhance collaboration between the actors working on climate change, health, and women's rights, and support research to help fill knowledge gaps on climate change and its impact on sexual and reproductive health and rights, including sexual and gender-based violence. For example, within Global Affairs, we've really been working hard to bring our teams working on climate change together with, for example, my team that works on SRHR. Often there's silos and big bureaucracies, as we all know, and we need to be doing all that we can to be bringing those funding streams together, as well as the dialogue. And third, I think CSW is really helping us to have the conversations we need about climate justice movements that really place women, girls, and Indigenous people at the center of action-oriented solutions as decision makers, with their different needs and interests taken into account. And at the end of the day, I hope the action coalitions will really enable policymakers to hear firsthand how natural disasters and extreme weather are impeding access to sexual and reproductive health services, which we know are already so fragile in many parts of the world. We need to help them hear how menstrual hygiene management is impacted by disruptions to water quality and sanitation as a result of climate-related emergencies. And really importantly, how sexual and gender-based violence has been heightened during times of crisis, during the pandemic, but also, as other speakers have highlighted, also related to impacts of climate change. So ultimately, I'd say let's be inclusive, let's listen, let's involve youth through the entire process. Again, that's where the action coalitions, I think, are working. And we need to ensure that women in marginalized groups have equitable access to climate finance so that they're empowered and have the resources they need to improve climate action, both within their communities and beyond. Thanks, Roberta.
Thank you very much, Tanya. I liked how you began. We need to speak up. We need to be loud. I think this is not the time for politeness. We have to be always civil, but it is a time to be loud and to be insistent. We are living in times of existential crises, which are impacting women in all their diversities in some pretty terrible ways. We want to finish this section of the program by introducing a video that from Ambassador Delphine of the government of France, and who is the Secretary General for the Generation Equality Forum. And in this video, she's addressing the responsibility of Action Coalition leaders and other stakeholders to address the intersectional issues of sexual reproductive health and rights and climate change. Shakira, can you play that video, please?
Dear champions, dear participants, dear all. It is my true honor and my pleasure to be participating in this panel discussion today. Even though I could not be present in live, I wanted to intervene and also to answer your question. First of all, I would like to thank UN Women and also the different thematic leads and the co-champions that have worked and got involved in the preparation of this event. If you may remember, our goal and hope back in June at the Generation Equality Forum was to contribute to remobilizing the international community in favor of gender equality, and that concrete commitments will be made to achieve a multilateralism through action and to make ambitious, innovative, and concrete commitments beyond the effects of announcements. This moment is a genuine testimony that even after more than 8 months since the forum, champions and actors are very much determined to continue fighting for gender equality and women's rights. The world got darker so rapidly with so many crises, whether health, climate, political, or humanitarian, that are currently raging all over the world, especially in Ukraine. These crises reinforce gender inequalities and hit women and girls very hard in their daily lives. They also remind us that our collective response must be to strengthen the rights of women and girls. We cannot achieve sustainable peace, climate justice, without involving half of the population and collectively fighting for gender equality. It also reminds us how important it is to coordinate our efforts and that we need more than ever strong collaborations and partnerships. This leads me to your question about what is the responsibility of Action Coalition leaders and other key stakeholders to drive financing and partnerships on the intersectional issues of SRHR and climate change. Our action coalitions are a place where we can make all happen, in the sense that is it a collective of different geographical scope, expertise, experiences, and also with diverse networks. The action coalition leaders, including France, must consider the coalition as a means to leverage important challenges, such as the intersecting issues of SRHR and climate change. Indeed, we all know that SRHR and bodily autonomy are the foundations for achieving gender equality and the empowerment of all women and girls. On another side, climate change has differential and negative impacts on women, girls, and gender diverse people, including in their ability to exercise their SRHR as a result of structural discrimination and intersecting inequalities that contribute to marginalization and vulnerability. Leaders and champions made great commitments in June for the SRHR coalition. We must advocate for these commitments to be climate change sensitive so that our efforts contribute to sustainable development for all. We also need to see these action coalitions as tools of advocacy to gather more champions with us fighting for SRHR and climate change in coordination with the other coalitions. The 66th session of the CSW is an important opportunity to anchor the forum and its result in the overall work of the United Nations. But it's also an opportunity for the champions and the leaders to speak up in the name of their organization, but also as a group, as a member of a collective, the Generation Equality Forum Collective in the Global Acceleration Plan. This is through these collective efforts that we will be able to maximize our impact in order to drive new financing, new partnerships, and new norms for SRHR and climate change, and more globally for gender equality. Let me finish by recalling the theory of the hummingbirds, the smallest species of birds on the planet, and yet so impactful on our ecosystem. If everyone does its own share, like the hummingbirds, according to its own capacities, and if we organize through collaboration every action, then the world will be a greater place for the generation ahead of us. I wish you very interesting exchanges, and I thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. And so, Shakira, we've come to the end of the speed, almost feels like speed talking. And I want to thank Yamide and Paula